There's a method Andrei Karpathy described for getting better answers from AI that I recently came across with. It's called the LLM Council Method, and it's a brilliant strategy. There are 5 thinking styles running simultaneously, peer reviewing each other anonymously, and synthesized into a final verdict by a chairman. Concept is simple, but incredibly powerful. And so I decided to build it and I plan to use it alongside my existing AI advisory board. So in this video, I want to walk you through the whole system. By the way, if you're new here, my name is Hazel June, and I work with online business owners building AI resources and helping clients use AI. I've worked with the top online programs in the space that, generate over 7 figures a year, coached hundreds of business owners, and trained thousands of people on leveraging AI. Now, I already had an AI advisory board. I mean, if you've seen any of my previous content, you've heard me mention it. I've built a setup where I can pull in 10 different thought leaders and run a decision through their lens, and it's been really useful. However, I noticed something. The advisors in my board are personas. They have their own worldviews. For example, one of my AI advisors is Brian Harris. And so whenever he shows up, he gives me a Brian Harris flavored answer like growth channels, referral systems, 90-day planning. That is the frame every time. And the same goes for the rest of my personas or AI advisors. What I didn't have was tension between thinking styles. And so I didn't have the advisor who is actively trying to break the idea. I didn't have the one who genuinely has no context and is just reacting to what's literally on the page. I didn't have the one who ignores everything except, okay, what do you actually do on Monday morning? And more importantly, there was no mechanism for them to react to each other. Well, actually, that's not true because I have a war room folder in my AI operating system. However, I have to manually pick which advisors I want to debate on a certain topic. And so when I came across Karpathy's LLM council methodology, I got super excited. Andrei Karpathy, for those of you who do not know, is the former AI director at Tesla. He's one of the co-founders in OpenAI, and now he's part of Anthropic. And he described the method where you run any question through a council of different LLM models and then have them review each other anonymously, then synthesize a final verdict. They're not personas or different experts, they're different thinking models that present different perspectives. Okay, now let's take a look at the core LLM council method, which involves 3 different stages. Stage 1, individual opinions. Stage 2, anonymous peer review. And then stage 3 is synthesis. Now with stage 1, what happens is that your question is going to go to all of the council members simultaneously. And each LLM or advisor is going to respond independently without seeing what the others are actually thinking. Now, in stage 2 is where it gets interesting because each LLM or advisor is going to receive all the other responses, but without knowing the identities of who actually made those responses. And they're going to be asked to rank all of those anonymous responses by accuracy and insight. This actually prevents the members from playing favorites or having their own biases. And then finally, in stage 3 is where a designated chairman of the council is going to review all of the original responses plus the peer ratings, and then it's going to compile everything into a coherent single answer. Now, there are different versions of this LLM council method, and the one that I wanted to build was the 5-member one. So let's dive in. All right, let's meet the 5 advisors. In the original LLM council methodology by Andrei Karpathy, the council members are actually different LLM models like Grok versus Claude versus ChatGPT versus Gemini, that thing. Now, what I'm building has 5 different advisors. They're not necessarily different LLM models. They're 5 different thinking models. Now, full disclosure, this is not something that I came up with. Somebody else actually came up with this idea and I thought it was brilliant. And so that's the reason why I'm building something similar. So let me explain the 5 different advisors. We got the Contrarian, First Principles Thinker, Expansionist, Outsider, and Executor. Each thinking module has its own role in the council. So let's take a look at each one. Let's start with the Contrarian. So the Contrarian's job is to look for what's wrong, what's missing, or what's going to fail. They start from the assumption that the idea has a fatal flaw. And so they try to find it. If everything looks solid, they're going to dig deeper. Now, they're not necessarily a pessimist. They're not there to crush your idea or your concept. Think of it like a business bestie who saves you from a bad deal by asking questions you've been avoiding. All right, now let's take a look at the first principles thinker. So the first principles thinker ignores the surface question and asks, what are we actually trying to solve here? They're going to strip away assumptions and they're going to rebuild the problem from the ground up. And sometimes the most valuable thing they're going to say is that you're asking the wrong question entirely. Next up is the expansionist. While the contrarian is looking for what breaks, the expansionist is looking for what you're leaving on the table. What could be bigger? What adjacent opportunity are you not seeing, or what's being undervalued? The expansionist doesn't really care about risk because that's the contrarian's job. What they care about is what happens if this works better than expected, whether you are positioned to capture that upside or whether you've scoped the thing too small. Now, let's take a look at the outsider. So, this is the most underrated member of the council because the outsider has zero context about you. It has zero context about your field, about your history, your background, your audience, why you made the decisions you've made. They respond purely to what's in front of them. And this is incredibly powerful because we tend to develop blind spots, right? And especially for experts, the curse of knowledge is real. And so the things that are completely obvious to us because we've been doing it or seeing it for years may not be as obvious to someone seeing it for the first time. And so the outsider catches that. Now, finally, we have the executor. So the executor only cares about one thing. Can this actually be done? And what is the fastest path to doing it? They ignore theory, strategy, and big picture thinking. If an idea sounds brilliant but has no clear first step, the executor will say so. And more practically, if the path to getting it done requires resources that you currently do not have or skills that you haven't built yet, the executor is going to let you know up front. And so these are the 5 different advisors. We've got the contrarian, the first principles of thinking, the expansionist, the outsider, and the executor. Now, you might be wondering, all right, that's cool, but how does it actually work? Let me get into the mechanics. What you're seeing right now is the skill file of the LLM council that I have created. Now, let me walk you through how it actually works. So it has 5 different steps. The first step is to frame the question. So whenever the council is triggered, like if you're asking a question, if you need some help, if you actually invoke it, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to scan the workspace for context. And what this does is that it will start to collect context based on whatever you have available. So for example, in my case, when I use this within my badass base workspace or my client's workspace, it's going to scan whatever files I have so that it starts collecting relevant information. And then from there, it's going to reframe the question. And the framed question will have the core decision, key context from the user's message, key context from the workspace files based on what it was able to scan, and then what is at stake. And then there's another rule here that if the question is super vague, it's going to ask one clarifying question. Once that's done, step 2 is where the council is going to convene. And this is the interesting part because it's going to spawn 5 advisors simultaneously as parallel sub-agents so that all of the 5 council members are going to review the question in parallel. Now, in order to do that, it will reference the sub-agent orchestration where it actually outlines how the sub-agents need to be orchestrated. Once the responses are done, step 3 is where the peer review starts to happen. So they're going to collect all the 5 responses. We'll label them response A through E for 5 different responses, and then randomize which advisor maps to which response so there's no positional or identity bias. Each of them is going to review all the others' responses, and they're going to have their own lens to evaluate the responses through. And again, it's going to spawn 5 different sub-agents, and they're going to review the responses in parallel. Finally, step 4 is where the chairman of the council reviews everything. So it's going to get the original question, all 5 advisor responses that were de-anonymized, and then the 5 peer reviews. And then step 5 is where the chairman is going to present the verdict following this format. And so what you end up with isn't just opinions. You're going to end up with something that you can hold against your own judgment and actually act on. Now, if you're wondering how I actually set this up, because remember, this is not something that I invented, right? It's something that I adopted based on what I've seen online. And so what I did was I researched about the LLM council methodology, and I found a GitHub repo of this thing. And then from there, I asked Claude to create that skill. Because remember, Claude has a default skill creator. And so once I said create a skill, it will automatically invoke the skill creator skill. So I just provided it the context, like what the description is, how it works, who are the 5 advisors, and then the rest of the instructions that I've pasted here. And then from here, it started building the skill for me. It even called me out because remember, I already have my AI advisory board. It also flagged a couple of things like the whole sub-agent thing. Because remember, for getting a response from the 5 advisors and then the peer review stage, both of those phases would require spawning different sub-agents. And so it just explained that that sub-agent thing is not going to work unless I'm using the skill within Claude Code or Cowork, which was the original plan, because the Claude chat interface does not have the capability to spawn sub-agents in parallel. And so it even said inside a single Claude with no sub-agents, the anonymous peer review is just theater, because you won't be able to make it anonymous because everything is in just one chat. Now, after a little bit of back and forth, it was able to build the skill for me. And then from here, all I had to do is click Save Skill. And it will be automatically saved in my skills library. So if I go to Customize and then Skills, now you see I have the LLM Council skill already saved. Now that we've set it up, let's go ahead and try it. So all we have to do to invoke this skill, we just have to type the / icon and then type LLM Council. There we go. And then I would want to ask it if I could record my YouTube videos in batches of 4 or 1 at a time. So let's try. All right, let's see what it got. So as soon as it ran the command, it started scanning the workspace to get some context, right? Which is the first step. And then once the context has been collected, it framed the question for the council. So this is the frame question so that all the council members have enough context about what the question is really about. And then from here, all 5 advisors have given their own opinions about the question. For example, the Contrarian said batch recording sounds like productivity. However, it's not. It's a procrastination structure dressed up as efficiency. Interesting. First principles thinker, the real question isn't batches or solo. The real question is, what is the actual bottleneck on YouTube output? That's a really good question to ask. Expansionist, nobody's asking the real opportunity question here. What does a disciplined batching habit unlock beyond just efficiency? Good question. And then we have the one for outsider. The question is whether to record them 4 at a time or 1 at a time. Executor, what actually needs to happen for either option to work, which is what an executor cares about. And then after that, stage 2 is all about peer review, right? Like what we've talked about earlier, the responses are relabeled and they're randomized. So Contrarian is reviewing response D, first principles is reviewing response B, expansionist, response A, and so on and so forth. And for each reviewer, they have strongest response, the biggest blind spot, and then what all 5 have missed. And it's the same structure for the rest of the council members. And then finally, the chairman synthesized all the responses and peer reviews and presented the verdict, which is this. So the frame question, should I record YouTube videos in batches of 4 or 1 at a time, given that YouTube is priority number 2 in a sprint dominated by daily outreach? And so where the council agrees, batching only works if the scripts are done before the recording session. That's so true. Where the council clashes, the contrarian says 1 at a time, keeps my content timely and my ideas sharp, which is a really good point. And then batching produces weaker videos by the 4th one and creates false productivity. Okay. Expansionist says batching creates a publishing buffer and thematic coherence that 1 at a time can never achieve. First principles thinker and the outsider both flagged a meta question and nobody else asked. Is the weekly cadence itself correct, given her quality issues? Or 1 strong video per month beats 4 mediocre ones per month? Okay, blind spots the council caught, the editing bottleneck, that is so true. Real bottleneck is probably the creative ritual, not the recording format. So the recommendation is to start with 2 at a time, not 4, and then it went on and provided its thought process behind the recommendation. And then it went on and added what I need to do first, which is to finalize 2 scripts. That is true if I want to do 2 videos at a time. And then it ended with an uncomfortable question. And it says, if you're honest about why you're asking this question, is it because you're trying to find a recording format that makes YouTube feel more manageable, or because you've actually identified recording setup time as the real obstacle? Okay, that's something worth sitting with for sure. So as you can see, this is really cool and helpful because you get to see different POVs or perspectives on the question that you're asking about. By the way, if you want the skill instructions, make sure to check the link in the description below. And if you love these kinds of AI use cases, make sure to like and subscribe. And hit that notification bell too, so you're notified when I drop a new video. I actually share videos every week on AI systems and building a solo business. And so if that's your jam, stick around. I'll see you in my next video. Ciao.